I'm Amanda, and this is Not Your Granny's Quilt Show. Today, my guest is Erin Bauchan-Caprara. She is another millennial quilter. She is a thrifty gal who likes to thrift for her quilting fabric and use up her scrap stash. She is a great inspiration for just really getting in there and using your stash and trying something new. She's got a cool campaign that she did this spring with quilty postcards. I'm sure you could see the fruits of her labor on her Instagram from that, and just a cool concept for using up scraps. Otherwise, you can just find her in the quilty sphere trying new stuff and sharing her process. So please enjoy Erin. Well, hello, Erin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so excited that you're here. I've been following you for a little while and love your thrifty stuff and just your fun, scrappy ideas. And so I just thought it'd be fun to have you on and chat about all that fun stuff. But first, let's dive into like how you even got into sewing and quilting and where that all started.
Yeah, I got into sewing because my husband is a really amazing woodworker, and I was super jealous, and I wanted to have some kind of hobby that I could make beautiful stuff for our house as well. Because he was always making like plant stands and he makes beautiful furniture. And I was like, I want to contribute in making something cool. And so I wanted to learn how to sew, but I had no idea what to do. So I started looking at like Pinterest tutorials, and I learned a lot from the Susie Quilts blog. And then when I went to make my first like large scale actual quilt, I did a pattern test for the first time. Like I had no idea what I was doing, but Casey from Wellspring Design Studios, she put out a call for pattern testers, and somewhere in there it said something about it's okay if you're a beginner. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Hopefully that's cool. And it was fine. Because I'm a very hands-on learner, and I really wanted to know that I could ask someone a question. So if I got stuck somewhere, I could ask someone, hey, how do you do this? And there just weren't a lot of resources like that I saw. I didn't know anyone who sewed. No one in my family had a history of sewing. So I started testing people's patterns to learn how to sew. So it's a little backwards, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, that seems like a good place to do it because, like you said, there's a ton of people to ask questions of if you have them, and people are kind of answering your questions along the way as they're working through the patterns too. They're like, oh, watch out for this part. And I'm like, oh, dang, I never would have noticed that. Or like, oh, I'm so glad they said that because that really affects how I do, what I'm doing right now in the pattern. And so that's kind of a good
Exactly.
idea.
And well, and it helped me build my community quickly because I didn't know anyone who sewed, but it was a really great way for me to meet other people who did and maybe had more experience than I did. So even if I was working on a different pattern, I could be like, hey, this person really helped me out the last time. Maybe I could reach out to them and they would be able to answer my question on this.
Yeah.
That was huge. I feel like I would never have been as good as I am so quickly if I hadn't done that.
Yeah. Yeah. Like having a community around you who knows what they're doing and can guide you through those, even if you don't know what you're doing, it like 10x is your skill building because they're around, they can tell you like, oh, you don't do that or do it this way. And you're like, oh, sweet. I didn't have to like mess up and then try to figure it out later. It's like they can catch you right away and help you out in the moment. That's so nice.
It's like being in a workshop. Like I always took it like a class, like, okay, this is my class for learning how to do this particular skill. It might be like, we're learning how to do HRTs, for example. I learned how to do that in a pattern test. I had no idea how to do it, but it was great because I had the support of 7 other people when I did it for the first time, which was huge for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how I practiced flying geese, was testing Katarina's patterns. Like I never had tried in this up to that point, 5 years of quilting that I had been doing. I had never tried any flying geese. And she just happened to do like two patterns of hers in a row that had flying geese. And I was like, wow, I guess I'm doing this.
Right. I guess this is my new thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then I had a whole bunch of client quilts right around that same time that needed flying geese because I was making sawtooth stars. And I was like, well, I guess this is my life now. But again, it was like that community of testers plus like other, I had made great connections through that, and they all had great tips and tricks on how to like get them to line up nicely and be, square them up really well. And without them, I would have really struggled longer than I
Exactly.
did.
Yeah. It's amazing how just making those connections can really improve your sewing skills so quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how long ago was that you started?
I made that quilt in January 2022.
Okay. So not too long ago.
Not too long ago. So only about a year. It was
Yeah,
my first full quilt that I made.
that's awesome. And I see Rada's quilt behind you.
Yes, yeah, I tested that one for her. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. There's a lot of bias triangles in there, so that was a really fun new skill for me.
Yeah, I told her I would test the mini, and I haven't gotten to it yet because I've been super busy, but I still want to so bad, and I want to put it on the back of one of my denim jackets I've been saving for a quilt block. And so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do it. I just need like 10 minutes of
Yeah,
like
I want to
time
make
to myself.
a little one in the scraps that I have from this and make
Yeah.
it into a little dog coat is my
Oh my gosh.
I
That
think it
would
would be
be
so cute.
so cute. Oh my gosh. That's such a good idea. Oh, I like that idea. How fun.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, I'm excited to try that one because, yeah, again, it's got some new stuff in it that I've never tried. So I'm really looking forward to testing it. Or I guess it's past the point of testing because it's out, but trying it.
Trying it out. Yeah. I really liked working with Rada. I felt like she was awesome to test for because she was so open to
Mhm.
other people's feedback and comments. It felt like a really collaborative experience. It was really great working with her.
Yeah, she seems really fun to work with. And just in our conversation, we talked for probably like 15 minutes before we started recording. And then like when we stopped recording, we talked for another 45 minutes. Like I was like, oh my God, I have to go.
Yeah, she's so fun.
Yeah. Yeah. She's great. But yeah, I just found the world of testing to be so fun and just like a great encouragement to try something that you wouldn't necessarily try on your own. Like, at least in my case, I don't know if you felt that way, but
Oh, definitely. I wanted to tackle curves was
mm,
my big goal for 2023. I was like, I'm going to learn how to do curves and I'm going to do them well.
mhm.
And I did, what was it? The brass ring quilt, and it is all curves. It's like 7 curves for each block. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm
Yeah.
going to make it work. And it turned out so good. It's one of my favorite quilts. And I was amazed by how well like it actually came together. And I learned so much doing
Mhm.
that quilt and then back to back doing a couple other quilts that were curves because I use different fabric brands for
Mm,
them, and just learning how things stretch and how things come together and how they iron out when you put them in curves.
yeah.
It was so valuable. Like I learned so much about my preferences during that time that I never would have if I didn't just like make myself go through that.
Yeah. Like it's incredible how much the fabric matters when you're doing curves.
Oh yeah. Like hands down, if you ever asked me what fabric should I use for curves, I will tell you Kona.
Yeah.
Like it looks so much better. Like it doesn't wrinkle as much,
Hmm.
smooths out really nicely, it sews really well. That's one, yeah. If you're new to curves, Kona is what you want to start with. Like that is going to be the easiest thing to start sewing with.
Yeah. I literally just finished a quilt. I finished long arming it today, but it's rainbows. And I had to take, I think it's a Megan Collins pattern.
Okay,
It's
yeah, I've
like
seen that.
big rainbows, and but
Mhm.
the client, she wanted them shrunken down so that there could be 24 instead of just 6.
Oh, wow.
And they're all out of like her daughter's swaddles and crib sheets and like just different fabrics that aren't quilting fabric. And with the stabilizer and all that stuff, it made it so hard. But the outside, like the background, which the
Mhm.
inside of the rainbow, and then the outside was Kona snow, and that was the only fabric that like worked really well.
Yeah.
Like, well, at
I
least there's
can
that.
imagine that would have been so difficult.
It was tricky for sure.
I've done linen before, and that's not too bad. But
Okay.
swaddles, like,
Yeah. Well, because
I
we had
have
to
to give you
stabilize them.
serious props for that.
It was like, it honestly, once it got quilted up and everything, it's like, okay, this is actually super cute. And there were some problem children in the mix, but they actually quilted out fine. Like, I think there
Mhm.
was like one pucker that I just could not avoid. And I was just like, oh, well, like, I can't do
You've done your
anything about
best.
it. Yeah, she'll understand. So anyway, but yeah, it makes a huge difference. And Holly Clark just put out a free um version of her dot matrix pattern, and it's all curves. And so each square is like 2 quarter circles, like
Mhm.
kind of like, you know, like curve to curve at
Yeah.
on the opposite corners. And then as you build it, like the quarter circles come together to make a
Oh, to
full
make one
circle.
big.
And she did a scrappy version. So all the background fabrics are her, like all the low volume prints that she had in her scrap bin. And then all the middles are all the pinks that she had on hand.
Mhm.
It is so stinking cute. I was like, this is the pinkest of pink dreams of all time. Like, I love this, but just, and like a lot of her patterns are curve as well. And
Mhm.
she just makes it look so easy. And I'm like, okay.
That was the brass ring quilt that I did. There
Yeah.
was the 7 curves
Hmm.
per block.
Yeah.
Her instructions are so clear and so
Mhm,
concise that it
mhm.
makes doing curves much less intimidating. Like,
Yeah,
the great pattern to start, not necessarily that one, but one of her patterns would be a great
yeah,
intro to curves.
yeah. And she puts tons of stuff online too. So it's like, if you're struggling to like visualize it through the directions, then just go watch her reels. Like, she does a million of how to sew curves, and like, yeah,
Yeah,
watch me sew this curve. And it's like, okay, if she can do it, I can do it.
right. Because depending on the curve, it can be like you can approach it very differently. Like I found when I was making that quilt in particular, that the bigger curves, it was easier to do like the fold and pin technique.
Hmm.
But when I was doing like the really tiny, like super tight ones, it was so much easier to do like a free form, just like go for it and hope for the best kind of method.
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
otherwise they were so crunched.
Yeah. Yeah. And I found that with the rainbows too, since I had to scrunch like I had to make my own template,
Mhm.
and the tight inner corner or inner curves were just so much more difficult than the outer
Yeah.
ones. And so I just, like, the problem children ones were the ones where I was trying to like do the fold and pin method. And I was like, this isn't working. And I just said to heck with pins, and I just went for it. And then the rest of the blocks came out so much better. So yeah, it's kind of like, whatever. Do what
Yeah,
you got
it's
to do.
nerve-wracking to do it, but once you're like, I'm just gonna go for it.
Yeah. Well, like you said, the fabric matters too, because like sometimes it's better to pin it because it needs to stay in place. And sometimes it's
Mhm.
better to just free form it because you have to scooch it a lot more or do a lot more like maneuvering of it. So it's
Mhm.
like, you just got to know the fabric and how it's going to interact. And you just never know. But yeah, Kona, I agree with you. And then I did have to do curves with Art Gallery, which was my very first curve sewing
Mhm.
expedition. And as much as I love Art Gallery, that was tricky.
Yeah, it's tough with curves.
Hmm.
Because like this quilt behind me, this is made with Art Gallery fabrics, and it's like I love how it turned out, but I made a few with Art Gallery that were curves, and I just feel like it stretched because it's thinner and
Hmm.
silkier. I feel like it stretches a little bit more and
Hmm.
it gets kind of out of whack. a lot
Yeah.
faster. And
Hmm.
that can be really challenging especially if you're somebody who's just learning
Yeah.
and your stuff is going to be a little out of whack already.
Yeah.
Like it gives a little bit more than you need to
Yeah.
try to work with to like correct against.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But it's one of those things too. You got to like live and learn. You have to just figure it out.
Exactly. You're just gonna
And
find your way. Just try a bunch of things, eventually get there.
yeah. Yeah. So, um, what I guess, because see all your kind of thrifty and scrappy kind of
Mhm.
ideas. And so what led you to that avenue of quilting versus, the other avenues of buying everything brand new, like some of us
Yeah.
like to do?
I mean, part of it is probably my upbringing. I was raised by my mom and my grandpa, and my grandpa was an extremely thrifty person. Like,
Mm.
if he would, I mean, to the point that sometimes it was a little ridiculous, I'll be honest. Like we didn't have trash service. He would recycle everything he possibly could, and then burn the rest in our wood burner, for example. But he taught me a lot about using what you have and being able to make something from what you have. And I was so surprised that instead of growing up and being kind of like, that's what I grew up with and I want to change and I, don't want to see the value in that, I
Mhm.
actually really embraced it as I got older. I was like, I think it's really kind of a fun challenge. And then when I started sewing, I was really surprised by how expensive fabric was, and I wasn't very good. So I was afraid that I was going to buy a lot of fabric and then I was going to mess it all up and I would end up with like $100 mess on my hands.
Mhm.
And I loved thrifting. So I would just go to the thrift store and see what I could come up with. And, if I cut it up and it was all terrible, it cost me $5. So I didn't even care. And it gave me like the license and the freedom to just learn, I feel like. And so from there, after I actually learned and felt like, okay, I've got a handle on this, it was a really fun challenge. Like I loved going to the thrift store and finding something and being like, okay, but what can I make with this? And putting all these things together and then just having like a found color palette rather than a chosen color palette.
Mhm.
And since I did that so much, I almost found it really difficult to reverse engineer the process and actually like pick my own palette. So I broke my foot and I had to have foot surgery in November. So I couldn't actually go out and buy anything. I had to actually buy fabric online for the first time, which I've never done before.
Oh, wow.
Um, and I had no idea what I was doing. It was so difficult. And I ended up with such weird mixes of things because
Mm.
when you're in the store, you can actually like pick everything up and see like, do the tones really come together? Like, how does this actually pair?
Yeah.
But when you're looking at it online, like depending on how they have it presented, like it might look more purple than it really is, or more yellow than it really is. And when
Mhm.
it comes to your house, you're like, oh God, what did I just pick? Like, I have no idea what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
it can be
yeah,
dicey.
it can be real dicey. Like the first time that I ever picked fabric out, I was testing a pattern and I had gotten a deal with a fabric shop where if we use that fabric shop, we got a discount. I was like, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm going to buy fabric online for the first time. And I was so nervous. So I bought like twice as much fabric as I needed because I was afraid I was going to cut into it and I was going to not have enough. And then how would I ever get more?
Yeah.
I could just buy more. Um,
Simple.
and, and then I bought a few extra colors because I was afraid that once they came, none of them would actually match up together. And they didn't, I did have, because I really like kind of like retro 70s colors. And I
Mhm.
picked like rusty oranges and yellows and browns. And I definitely put it all together and put it out and was like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to make like a poop and pee quilt here. Like, this is not pleasing. I don't know if that's what I was going for.
You're like, wow, okay.
Yeah, like, okay, well, there's some lessons to be learned here.
my gosh. It's hard.
It's so hard.
It's so hard. Oh my gosh. That's so funny though. You're like, what did I do?
It's so much easier for me to have a bunch of things and then mix them together and see how they look than to just choose them. It's so
Mhm.
intimidating to do that. So I feel like part of that is my motivation behind thrifting, because then I have at least something to start with,
Yeah.
somewhere to go.
Yeah. You're like, okay, here are the colors I need, not just like, I hope this works.
Right. Like I have like, oh, I have this blue and I have this yellow. What's going to go with this blue and this yellow? Okay, I can buy 3 more colors that are going to go with this. But starting from scratch, like
Hmm.
that's one of the hardest things in quilting, I feel like.
Yeah. It can be so tricky. And like, I just bought all the fabric for my youngest, his graduation quilt, and he wanted all solids and purples and cream. And I was like, okay. So uh, I did go with all art gallery solids. Um, and they had a pretty good selection, but like again, there nobody here in town sells it.
Mm-mm.
And so I had to buy online, and I had to buy from a couple different shops because not everybody had like the all of the colors I wanted. And so I was like trying to go back and forth like 65 times to make sure that like I had everything and that I picked the right ones that weren't too pink or weren't too, it's like, uh, and they all just arrived literally right before I got on here. So I like opened it up really quick and like pulled them all out. And I was like, okay, we're good. It's good. We're good.
Good. I'm glad it turned out.
I'm like, I don't have that much time. And if I have to reorder stuff, like I have, mere weeks versus, months, which anyway, I procrastinated. Big whoop.
We all do. I
Yeah.
feel like I work best under pressure sometimes.
Yeah.
So sometimes, you put it off for a while and then you're like, okay, now I've really got the motivation, like
Yeah.
really dig into this. Otherwise, I could just be over here like haphazardly binding something for 3 months.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like puts a fire under my ass to like get it done. I'm like binding the night before I need to like give it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm sorry. But he's not,
Binding in the car on the way there, like, hope we'll get there.
yeah. Well, and he's not leaving until August, but like I just want to be able to give it to him at his party, So I'm like, okay, I need to figure this out. But anyway, so it came, it's all good. But yeah, it was like it took me hours just to like go source all the different purples in, the pure solids line and just figure out which ones I wanted and which ones were going to go together and meet his aesthetic. And because literally he just said purples and cream. And I was like, okay. So anyway, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's scary.
It's yeah. And I feel like I also have a lot of anxiety around like making the wrong choice, which I
Mhm.
mean, it's a quilt. Can it be a really wrong choice? No.
Unless it
But
looks like poop and pee.
yeah, unless it looks like poop and pee, like that one. I didn't make it look like poop and pee. I
Okay,
took
good.
out I mixed it, I made it, I corrected it. I think it looks okay.
Okay, good.
I guess time will tell. If
Yeah.
anyone thinks it looks like poop and pee, they can tell me.
I haven't
Hopefully
seen
not.
anything like that, so
Yeah.
I think you're good.
Yeah. I think it turned out all right. But yeah, it's definitely one of the hardest things. I feel like it's one of the hardest steps of quilting for me personally.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, if I can't get everything in like one line of fabric, that's when I really struggle. Because I'm like, oh, it's all from the same line. It's going to match. It won't matter. So I like, if I am buying fabric, I try to do that if I can, but that's not always the case. Like, just
yeah.
so I think over time it gets a little easier just as far as like, just knowing kind of like, okay, I know that this line of blenders is going to lend really well to this kind of pattern, or just like, give it a certain kind of feel. And so you can kind of start there and then build off of that. But like, man, yeah, I'm with you. Like for my own quilts, it gives me so much anxiety because I'm like, what if I hate it? What if I don't make it good enough? Or, you know, I'm like, what if I waste all this fabric again? Because it's expensive and hasn't stopped me from buying so much freaking fabric, but then it just sits because I'm like, oh, I don't want to mess it up.
That's how I feel about prints. I'm so intimidated by prints. Like,
Mm,
I could do salads all day, but give me a print and I'm gonna be terrified of that thing for some reason. Like I'm afraid I'm gonna make it look so busy.
mm,
But some people make the most beautiful quilts with prints and it blows my mind. Like my
yeah.
friend Emily, you interviewed her,
Hmm.
a few weeks ago, from Peach and Honey Studio. She makes the most beautiful quilts with prints, and I have no idea how she does it. Like it just blows my mind.
Yeah.
How you can figure out how to blend all of that without making it look like a just busy mess.
Hmm.
I'm lucky if I can work in one print. Like that's wild for me.
Yeah. Maybe that can be another 2023 challenge to
Yeah, there we go.
incorporate
There's
more
another
print.
challenge.
And you can do
Two
low
prints.
volume, like it doesn't have to be crazy, you can start slow and
Yeah,
try to incorporate a low volume print into something because then it won't be overwhelming if there's,
that's true.
you know, a bunch of it. I
Yeah.
love like tone on tone or just like, near tone on tone. If it's like, tan on white or gray on white or I just love it so much.
Yeah. Even a print on the back of my quilt would be like a good step for me. We
Yeah.
could start there.
Yeah. There like honestly, there's nothing better to me than like a quilt that is solids on the front and then like just a hardcore print on the back, just like crazy bright fun. It's so good. I always love that. So when people reveal that, I'm like, yes. Uh, it just
Do you have any big 2023 goals that you're working on? Big
I have
projects?
so many because I don't know how to say no, but um I am doing a lot of things probably, but I did tell um I did tell Lonnie that I would make a pair of pants. So I have the pattern, I have the fabric. My mom knows how to sew garments really well because that's like where she started sewing. And so she said she'd help me by making her own pair along with me. Um, trying to think. I did just tell Katarina that I'd test her next quilt. Not the one that is happening at the moment because of the wedding and stuff, but
Mhm.
I'll do the next one. So that's one that's coming up. I'm like trying to think of what else I've agreed to because Rada's quilt, mini quilt. I don't know. I'm sure there's something else, but I don't know. I think with a business, like quilting for other people is like my constant. And so finding
Mhm.
time to make stuff for myself is tricky. And I don't really have a sewing space at my own house. And so just to do any sewing, real sewing, I have to go to my parents' house and that's where I work. So it's kind of hard to feel
Yeah.
like I can sew for myself and not be working when I'm there. And I totally could. It's just one of
I
those
could see how that
things.
would be difficult.
Yeah. So I I definitely have stuff in mind that I want to do and um because I've been focused on quilting and learning to make different types of quilts and stuff for the last 6 years, I think branching into other things like some clothing items or bags like oh yeah, I said I told Lonnie I'd also make her BFF bag. Best fucking fanny. That's what
Oh yeah.
BFF stands for. Um
I love that name.
yeah. And so I got that pattern. So I have the pattern and um I want to use like leftovers from my pants fabric in that. And just I'm gonna make it scrappy because I've got so much scrap that it would be perfect or that would be perfect for that. So I'm gonna do that. But I don't know. I'm just winging it over here.
I hear that.
Trying to stay away from half square triangles because that's like what was my go-to jam for every quilt I ever made for the first 2.5 years. So it's
Branching out a bit.
yeah. But like we were saying, the testing that I was doing, pushed me to try things I had never tried before. And now I'm like, okay, now I'm looking at other patterns for my own quilts to go, okay, what do I want to make now? And you know, what do I want displayed in my home, and trying to choose more carefully the fabrics that I use so that they go in my house a little better. Cause right now they're a hot mess. They're
I
all over the
get
color spectrum. So
I get that. It's hard because I find, especially living in Michigan, in the middle of winter, I don't want to make some, like my house is pretty like green and lots of, wood tones and a
mhm,
little more neutral. And I appreciate that because it's calming, but I don't necessarily want to make a quilt like that in the middle of winter. Like it is just desolate looking outside, and I want happy, fun, bright colors,
yes.
which looks super weird in my house.
Yeah.
But I still enjoy it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and I'm like you. This green wall behind me is the same green that's in my living room because I love green. I love green. And I've got pops of chartreuse and different things, and neutrals and gray, and just kind of, yeah, very kind of calming and neutral background. But like the Christmas quilt I just made for this last Christmas was with the art gallery. Um, what's the line? For Christmas in the City. And there's lots of hot pinks and like different
Mhm.
fun colors. Um, and then I used hot pink frosted minky on the back and pink thread to quilt it. And um, so that's fun. It has the greens in it. So I was kind of like, well, it works. And the one that I was hanging on the wall for display was the Lella Boutique Christmas morning from like 2 or 3 years ago,
Mhm.
2 years ago. And so that's the one that hangs, and that kind of matches, it's got the pops of red for Christmas, but the greens go really well with my house. And I'm like, oh, all my quilts are so crazy different. Like, I don't know. But that's just kind of how I am too. Like
Yeah.
there's an eclecticness to my home. So it doesn't stand out in a way that makes it go, why would that go like, why do you have that in here? It's just kind of like, no, everything's so different.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's part of the reason that I really like thrifting fabric, because I like those more vintage prints as well. I feel like they go a little bit more in my home
Hmm.
because I like older style furniture. Like you can't see it, but the desk that I'm sitting at right now is this huge old banker's desk
Oh,
that I found at a thrift store, and I love it. It even has like weird, like you have to pull out certain drawers so that certain drawers will unlock, kind of.
yeah.
I don't know. It's like being a little kid. Like you get something like, it's just a little fun.
Yeah.
Um, and I love that kind of stuff because it's unique and a little bit more interesting. But so much of that is what my house looks like. It's, I've got like a bunch of weird brass animals and plants and,
Hmm.
old furniture, and it would look strange if I had like
Hmm.
super modern looking fabric all the time. So I don't know, it kind of blends in with my house more. It's another reason that I really enjoy finding the older fabric. Plus,
Yeah.
I mean, you can give it a new life. Like it was obviously somebody's, they probably passed away more than likely, or
Hmm.
their kids donated it. And I like being able to take somebody's craft that they loved,
Hmm.
repurpose it and give it a new life. Like I feel like that's honoring like them and their craft. And I like being able
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah. Not just letting it sit there and go to waste, or, I'm sure someone else would have picked it up at some point, but like, just knowing that you can take it and repurpose it and let it live a little longer is kind of, I like that idea, because
Yeah.
that's like, I can't imagine how many quilts just go in the trash because people don't know what to do with them, or they get, wear and tear because they're old, and instead of trying to find somebody who can help fix it, they just toss them, and it's like, no, don't do that.
Exactly.
there's
Exactly.
there's
So
people who can do something with it or help you fix it, but don't throw it away. Like that's your grandma's legacy, or
well, especially, actually, learning how to do it yourself, how much work went into that. So
Mhm.
like, oh, she
Yeah.
would just be rolling over in her grave if she knew that you threw that away. Like
Right? Right? Especially how much hand piecing was done, you know, back in the day. Like, it's not as quick as just throwing it through a machine and letting the
No.
machine do the sewing. It's like, oh, we've, you know, so many times done or long armed, somebody's grandma's vintage, my great grandma and then my grandma and now my mom, it's like everybody's worked on it and it's all hand sewn and they're like, I don't want it to go to waste. And so it might not be the straightest, flattest thing in the whole world, but once it's quilted up and washed with back, it's like once it's done and you can use it, it's like, okay, here you go. Like, you don't have to hide this in the closet anymore for fear of it falling apart. Like,
Hmm.
just giving it that new breath of life is, it feels so satisfying because you're like, okay, I know someone put so much love and time into this, and I would hate to see it just like get moth holes in the in the cabinet,
Yeah.
you know?
That's so nice that you're able to do that and that people, entrust you with that service because that's such a nerve-wracking thing to,
It is.
I'm sure, to give over something like that and hope
Yeah.
for the best.
Yeah. Yeah, and it feels like such an honor when people do entrust us with that, because then it's like, okay, it kind of pushes us to want to like go the extra mile just to make sure it's like that much more perfect. And, you know, my mom and I both have a very strong, like, I don't know if it's a work ethic, I don't know what to call it, but just that like anything that goes out the door to a client, like we want to know that we did our very best on it because that's our name, that's our reputation. Like, I'm
Mhm.
not going to cut corners and be lazy just because I want to, because then if someone has a complaint about it, like I have nothing to say except like, oh, I just didn't feel like doing my best. Like, no
Right.
way. I could never live with myself. So I think on those, it just makes it like, okay, now we have to do extra to make sure that this works out. And, it's valuable to us that those people have their quilts. And so, anyway, I love the idea and, just helping people restore something that is so meaningful to them so that it's can live another generation and be continue to be passed through the family. It's like my, I don't know. I think some people get the wrong impression by the name of the show, not your granny's quilt show, but like it is in literal no disrespect to where quilting came from.
Mhm.
It's the mindset, right? So like
Yeah,
anyway, yeah, it's admirable to me that people like you who go and thrift those things and find them and give them new purpose and new life. And it's really it's really cool and meaningful. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for
oh
being
well,
one of
thank
the
you.
ones. Yeah.
I think it's a really nice way to basically give a modern spin to the tradition of quilting. Because
Yeah.
traditionally, quilting was just taking what you had and making a quilt out of it, making something more purposeful out of something that had lost its purpose.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what I like to think about the fabric that I find and kind of lost its purpose. It's just sitting on a shelf somewhere. Nobody really wants it. If I can take it and make it into something that is more than it is right now, then well, I've certainly done my job. I feel good about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's good to be said too for not just like keeping it as a quilt, but for people who thrift things and turn them into other stuff like pillows or coats or bags
Mhm.
or, you know, maybe it was beyond repair as a quilt. And so taking what's usable from it and turning it into something that can allow it to continue to exist. Like, I don't see anything wrong with that. I know some people get all hot and bothered by it, but I think if there's any attempt to keep these things out in circulation and alive, I think you know, that's admirable. It's just as important as the quilt itself. So,
Certainly. I mean, we don't have infinite resources at the end of the day. So if you can take what's already there and
mhm.
make it into something that is functional again, why not?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like, I like the idea of that. And even I don't remember who it was. maybe it was, I don't know, somebody I interviewed recently. I'm like, I can't remember anymore. But she was like, even that quilt behind you, if you end up hating it, because I was talking about how like the seams are popping in some areas because it was like the second quilt I ever made.
Mhm.
And and I didn't really want to follow the rules of 1/4 inch seam allowance. And so there's just little spots where I'm like, oh yeah, cool. Way to go, Amanda. But they're like, oh, you could just turn it into a quilt coat. And I was like, I could, but I don't want to cut it up.
I
Maybe
think
one
it would
day.
be really hard to do that. I've made one quilt coat before, but I intentionally made it into a quilt coat. Like
Right.
I
Yeah.
made a pillow pattern, which was the back of my jacket, and then made the jacket from there, from all of my scraps from a bigger quilt that I had.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could have just taken that big quilt that I just pieced together and cut it all up. I don't.
Yeah. And I know people do it, and I'm like, more power to you if you have that vision for like, you know what, this would be better as a garment. Like,
Yeah.
then do that. But I'm just not in that space yet. And I still really love this quilt, even though it's fucked up in places. Like I wrote in it, like in the border, things like welcome to the jungle. And I, I it was when I was still new to long arming. And so I think for me, it still has like nostalgic value. And so maybe one day it could be something cool like that. But right now I'm still happy with it as a quilt. So it's kind of like, but yeah, like if it's an older quilt that's not yours, like maybe it's easier to cut that up than to hang
Right.
on to it because you're not like, I made that with my bare hands.
Yeah, you're not thinking all the work that went into
Yeah.
making it and then being like, oh, now I have to undo it, but then I have to do more work. That sounds like a lot. I'm not sure I'm committed to that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I do have fabric though, because again, I do want a quilt coat, but my mom and I both have fabric set aside that we want to use to make quilt coats. And we have like the pattern template and everything. And so we know what to do. We've got what we need. We just have, again, time. Like
Mhm.
we just need to take a week off for ourselves sometimes. Like we're our own bosses. We can take vacation whenever we want.
Exactly.
But it's hard to remember because it's like I think she and I both like to take little bits here and there. It's like, you know, I'll take a day or two off in a week and then work a few more weeks and then take a day off and, just kind of spread out the time instead of big chunks. But
Mhm.
I know it's it's a weird balance, but it's
Yeah,
fun. So,
definitely.
so okay, so then I saw your scrappy postcards. So I want to hear more about this.
Okay.
Tell me.
I have tons of scraps, just like every other quilter, tons and tons of scraps. And then I actually, when I first started sewing, I didn't originally want to quilt. I wanted to make garments and I wanted to make bags, but I had no idea what I was doing. I was trying to figure out how to make a bag for the first time. And I had to buy interfacing, the only thing I knew about interfacing is that it made things stiff.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Joann's and I picked out the stiffest interfacing I could possibly find because I didn't understand at all how this worked.
Yeah.
And it was hard, like rock hard. And it's been sitting in my stash forever because I made this bag out of it. And this bag, it certainly stood at attention. Like it was something. And so the rest of it's just sitting in my stash for a long time. I've been trying to figure out what am I going to do with this. And I saw around the holidays, Susie Quilts had like a quilted postcard tutorial. And I was like, oh, that'll be really fun. I really wanted to learn how to make improv curves. And I wanted to do something where basically I could tackle a small project. And if I hated it, I could throw it away and I wouldn't even worry about it.
Right.
So I had all these scraps left over from my brass ring quilt. And I just started like cutting them up and learning how to piece them together. And eventually I got them to be like a little tiny block. And I was like, well, okay, what am I going to do with this now? Like, I don't want like a weird improv pillow. I'm like, oh, but I do have that interfacing that I've never done anything with. I could probably make a postcard. So I embroidered on it to, make it even more fun. And then I made one and I showed it to my friend Alexis. And I was like, hey, what do you think of this? This is pretty cool. And she's like, what'd be really fun is if we like did an exchange with them. I was like, oh, that would be a lot of fun. Like, let me make some more. And she made some, and we kind of figured out like what our, best practices for making them. Like, I mean, there's no perfect way to make a postcard. You're just basically sewing some scraps together and you're going to fuse it onto some interfacing and call it a day. Yeah. But it's a fun way to use up your scraps in a way that, because everyone has those super tiny little scraps that you're like, I can't make a block out of this. I can't, like, what am I going to do? Like a coaster? Like, you just want to throw them away, but then you feel like, oh, that's too wasteful. Mm-hmm. So I made a handful of them, and then we, we're like, hey, would anybody else be interested in doing this? So then I set up this exchange, and it's been fun so far. I've never organized anything like this before. I had no idea like where to start, other than I've participated in exchanges before. So I kind of used that model, and I had a lot more like international interest than I was expecting.
Wow.
So if I mean, not a ton, but like more, more questions than I was expecting. And I was like, oh man, I really should have learned more about how mail works outside of the US before I did it.
Yeah.
So I guess that'd be my advice if anyone wanted to do something similar. Learn about how mail works around the world.
Yeah, it's different.
It's definitely different, because I was like, okay, well, I want to keep it to US because I don't know how customs is going to work in other countries. And I've sent things to Canada, but that's it. Mm-hmm. I don't know, even going to like the UK, I have no idea what that process looks like. So I couldn't guide anyone through it. Yeah. And since I was hosting it, I wanted to be able to answer questions. It's been a really fun learning process though, so far. It closes on the 15th of April is when the sign up closes, and we're going to send them out by the 22nd because it's an Earth Day celebration thing, kind of encourage you to use up your scraps. But it's been fun so far, and I've, got some good participation so far. So I'm excited about that. I was a little nervous. It was just going to be, me and my postcards by myself. So
you're like, anybody?
Yeah. Well, it's so nerve-wracking when you put yourself out there and you're like, I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know if anyone's going to be interested in my idea. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a business. I'm just a quilter. I'm just a lady hoping people are interested in my quilts and want to chat with me. So yeah, you never know how it's going to go.
Yeah. That's kind of fun though. And I think too, like, as a business, sometimes those things are really pressury, because it's like you have more than just like, if it's just you as your own self, it's like probably people will have more grace for any hiccups. But I think as a business, people are like, you should know better. I'm like, I'm still just a girl. Like, I don't know.
Exactly. There's still just a person behind every business. So yeah, exactly. It's better to give everyone a little grace and just
for sure.
Expect that they're trying to do their best.
Yeah, for sure. That's so fun. And like, what a fun way for people to kind of dig into their scraps and try to make something fun and creative to surprise, other people and just share that.
Yeah. And it's a fun way to meet other people, because I know some of the challenges that I had when I first started quilting was that I didn't know anybody. Yeah. Like, you don't know anybody. And a lot of people connect with other people on Instagram, and that's great. But if you're a really small account and you don't have anyone to connect with, it can be really hard to break into that. Mm-hmm. And that's why I started pattern testing, was to try to connect with people and meet people. But I also know that that's a pretty bold move to make. That's not something that everyone's going to necessarily feel comfortable with. Yeah. And Emily and I from Peach and Honey Studio, we got to chatting a lot about this, because we really connected over the fact that it was really difficult for both of us to find like our community, our people when we first started quilting. Like, we'd reach out to different Facebook groups and not really get our answers We didn't feel comfortable in the local guilds, didn't
Mm-hmm.
really find our place. So I've been doing a little less quilting lately because I've actually been working behind the scenes with her so that we can, we're working on we're calling a society for quilters, just like a free group that we are putting together where kind of an intimate community to chat with other quilters, meet new people, and get your questions answered, because we didn't have anyone to ask any questions of when we first started quilting. And when you go to some of these bigger groups or you try to put them on Instagram and you are very new, sometimes you just get crickets, like nobody
Mm-hmm.
actually gets back to you. So if you can
Yeah.
create a smaller community where people actually have just a handful or 50 or less people to actually chat with,
Mm-hmm.
probably gonna get your questions answered. And that's what
Yeah.
I do.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so we're hoping to launch that in May. So it's been a little bit of a big undertaking, but I'm excited. And this postcard, project that I had was a really good introduction to how to organize something. So I appreciated baby stepping myself there.
Yeah. Little kind of behind the scenes steps to help you get to your larger goal. And I think that's so cool. And like, I just was so lucky to have a built-in community of my besties are quilters and my mom, and I had that already. And so for people who don't have that, I feel so sad because it has literally saved my life so many times in quilting. But yeah, it's like, and like, I honestly hope that like that's a goal I'm having here too, is to like create a space where that community can be built, and like hope I can be a shoulder for somebody to lean on, or lend an ear if somebody's like, I work through this quilt with you? Like, heck yeah, and that's what I'm here for. Like, I want that. And so I love that you guys are trying to do that and create a smaller scale situation, because I think too, yeah, like some of the groups online can get so big, and like, yeah, your questions don't get answered. Like, I sometimes take it upon myself to go in and just like scroll through and see if questions are asked and see if anybody actually answered the question, and like
Mhm.
try to figure that out, because I'm like, this person's really just looking for help. Like, don't be like, well, when I did that, like I had all this. It's like, that's not what they asked. They asked for help, not for you to relay your struggles to them as well. Like, oh, I had the same problem. It's like, and did you fix it? Like, did you solve it? Answer the question.
Like, who helped you, or what resources did you use, or how did you get to the end result? Because sometimes
Yeah,
it can just be like, and here's a pretty picture, and that's all I've got to bring to the.
right. Yeah. And like you said, it's, you know, the not everybody's going to jump into just being a pattern tester. And I don't think there's enough patterns out there for everyone to test, to just
No.
build their skills and ask their questions. But, it is a cool space for that. But yeah, it's like, if you aren't interested in testing, or it feels overwhelming, it's like, it's nice to know that more people are out there trying to create spaces for where more people can feel welcomed and get their stinking questions answered.
Exactly. Because, yeah,
So,
I mean, part of the reason that so I started quilting because I wanted to make fun things for my home. It was
yeah.
kind of a lighthearted, I just needed a hobby kind of thing. But then it really became like very therapeutic for me, because when I first really started quilting, like right before I made my first big quilt, I had
Mhm.
some of the biggest losses that I've had in my adulthood. I
Mm,
lost my dog, I lost my grandpa, and I didn't know what to do with myself.
yeah.
Like, it was definitely that time where you just you feel frozen,
Mhm.
and you don't necessarily know how to talk to anyone, you don't know what to tell anybody, and you just need to be by yourself to process it, but you don't know how to process it at the same time. And it was
Mhm.
so therapeutic for me to just come up into this room and put my focus into something. And if I wanted to just sit there and like sob while I did it, I could do it. And
Mhm.
it was just for me.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that, because it's like, you can sew through your heartbreak, and you can I always say, you can cry and still do the hard thing. Like, people are like, "Oh, cry, don't cry." I'm like, No, yeah, cry, get it out. Like your body needs
Yeah.
that release and it's fine. Like people who shame people for crying drive me crazy because it's a natural human reaction to emotion and like it's fine. It's good. Let it happen. Like,
Mhm.
and yes, like sob and sew. That's like yeah. And I I started quilting right around the time my grandma passed away. And so it was just yeah, something so nice to be able to dive into and channel some of that grief and, you know, like I said with the community of my besties were there too. So it's like I could just say I need a sewing day. Like I just need my people around me. And even if I just kind of sat there at my machine and didn't really sew, it just felt good like being in the same room and like or even just sewing for myself. Yeah, like you said, it's like I'm doing this for me. I'm doing this to process what I'm going through and just let it out instead of trying to find the words to say this really fucking sucks and like
Mhm.
I'm hurting and that's it. Sometimes that's all, you know.
Yeah. And
So,
it's also nice to have something like beautiful come out of that. Like that's
exactly.
very therapeutic as well, to
Mhm.
be, having some of the ugliest moments of your life. And then at the end of the day, you're like, you can physically see what came out of that. Like
Yeah.
that was remarkably therapeutic for me. I had not expected that. And it's probably why I stuck with it. Because
Yeah.
I've definitely been like a hobby hopper before then, but there was something that really stuck with me about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. And I'm so sorry that you experienced that loss. Like that's so hard. I'm glad it stuck.
Yeah, me
Your
too.
projects are gorgeous. You're great at quilting. So,
Thank you. I really
yeah,
appreciate that.
of course. Yeah. And I think it gives other people like hope. Like you know, you don't necessarily have to be alone and you can do something with that that energy
Mhm.
to get work through it and you know we're here for you too so
Yeah,
there's others of us who've used it as therapy and it works it helps
it definitely does.
yeah that's
I mean,
good
it also has helped me become more of a, or I guess not more, less of a perfectionist.
me too
Because I have a very type A personality and I want everything to be perfect. And that was something that I really had to put to the wayside when I started quilting and learn that not everything's going to turn out the way that I hoped it would. And not everything's going to line up exactly how I want it to.
mm-hmm.
Or, for example, the quilt that's behind me that I made, I sewed it all together incorrectly, like all the rows
Uh-huh
are mixed up. And I didn't even notice it until I took it out and I did this like really nice quilts in the wild photo shoot. And I was so proud of it. And I'm like editing the pictures and I'm like, nope.
you're like
The whole thing is sewn backwards.
oh no oh no you're like well here's one way to do it I mean
Yeah.
it still made a quilt
Yeah. Luckily, Rada was very gracious with me about it. And she was like, I love it. It shows the different way that you can put it together.
oh my gosh yeah I mean kind of at the end of the day, like people put out patterns, which is great, and that's their vision. But then, you know, even if it's a mistake, differences in that quilt, just like personalize it even further to the person who's making it. And I think, you know, from what I can tell from pattern writers that I've talked to, they love seeing that because you know, they're gifting you their creativity, but then taking it further, doing something different with it, just like shows that there is so much more creativity out there and like giving people a jumping off point for their own creativity to grow. Like, I love that. And, you know, I feel like growth minded people can accept that and be like, oh my God, yes, thank you so much for doing that. Like, it might have been a mistake on your part, but, you know, it just shows, yeah, there's more ways to do this than just what I wrote on paper.
Exactly. And that's something that I also really like about like using scraps or using thrifted fabric because you never like when you thrift fabric, you don't necessarily get to choose what quantity you get. Like you might get a bunch, you might get a little, you might get, a bunch, but it's all 12 inches in a big weird line. Like you don't know
Yeah.
what you're going to get. So the nice thing about just using your pattern as guideline instead is you can kind of pick and choose and say, okay, it doesn't, just because fabric A is supposed to be blue, maybe I can just pick a couple of these elements that I'm going to use for that. And then those are fabric A, but then I use a different fabric for the other parts that are supposed to be fabric A or something. And it completely changes the look of the quilt and makes it very you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And uses your stash.
Exactly. And you use up scraps, which is great.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I mean, it does look kind of tricky. So I think that's why I'm kind of like, oh, like the picking the fabric part is what's stressing me out about it, even though I know it's not that big of a deal, but again, it's the choosing fabric that I'm like, oh my
Yes.
God. But here's what I'm thinking is that I'm realizing that there will be quite a bit left over from my son's graduation quilt. So I'm like, maybe I'll just make it with that because it's all different shades of purple and cream and
Yeah.
black. And I'm like, I might just have set myself up nicely for that. So we'll
There
have
you
to find
go.
out. We'll see. But anyway, yeah, that'd be super cool to try. Like just try setting it up differently just for fun to see how it turns out. And like you said, if you're stashing it, then like, yeah, if something's supposed to be blue, like, okay, well, what kinds of blues do I have? And can they all go together? And can they fill in what I need? And it doesn't have to just be the one same fabric. And I think as long as you are consistent with like where you're placing it and, the color scheme that you're choosing, like it will still have maybe the original intention of the effect, but it will still look different. It'll still have a different personality than the original, which I think is super cool.
Yeah.
And
Because sometimes you can even take like one fabric that you have a bunch of, and you can use it for two of the, like you use it for like B and C, and it will completely change the shape of something. And that really makes a really cool visual effect too. So there's a lot you can do. I mean, if you use quilt ink and you can play around with the colors, it's a really like low stakes way to try it out. You don't have to cut into anything. If it's not quilt ink, you can try, there's a free app called Recolor. I don't know if you've used that before. It's like an adult coloring page app.
What? I'm writing this down right now, so don't mind me.
Yeah, I feel like this is like
Recolor.
probably my best trick for using thrifted fabric or scrap fabric would
Okay.
be download Recolor. It's a free adult coloring page app. And
Okay.
what you can do is you can take like, in a pattern where it's got the coloring page at the very end, take a screenshot of it and you can upload it into this app. And then, I mean, it's not going to give you like the colors, like you're not going to be like, it's Kona pickle or whatever.
Right. But you can get
You can
close.
say it's a neon green and you can, drop it here and there. And it really helps you to visualize what it's going to look like, especially if you have a bunch of random stuff or you're trying to use scraps.
Yeah. Oh, genius. I'm so excited right now because that is one thing. Like I know pattern designers have their software that they use, and so they can pull in fabrics and mock up different samples. Like Erica at Kitchen Table Quilting does it all the time for her patterns. Like people will say, I want to see it in this pattern or in this fabric line. And then she'll mock it up and she shares all those. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. But I'm not like a pattern designer. Like I don't really have that kind of thing. So this is going to change my life. And I'm so excited because it's like, I don't want to sit here and try to color in, like physically color a coloring page. I don't always have the time to just like sit there and do that. But if I could just like drag and drop colors into spaces and like figure it out really quick. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Okay. That's so
It's a game changer.
cool. Yeah. Oh, I love when I learn new stuff. Makes me so happy. And a handy tip for all of our listeners because they can do it too.
Exactly.
I love good tips. So and that actually leads me to my next question, which is, do you have like a tried and true tip or trick that besides the app that you just swear by and can't quilt without?
I recently learned how to hack myself a block ruler out of a standard, like a square ruler with
Yeah,
painter's tape. And that was a game changer for me because I am terrible at HSTs. I
they're
can't trim
hard.
them. They're always uneven. And I
Mhm.
need one of those block rulers in order to get it to consistently be the right size and not all wonky. But the idea of buying a specialty ruler every time I needed to make an HST was way too daunting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to explain. I do have a reel on my Instagram that
Okay.
shows you how to do it. But basically, you're going to take your square ruler and then mark off the size that it needs to be. So I have like a 4.5-inch square ruler, and say if I needed 3.5-inch, I would block off the 3.5-inch, so it's just that viewing area. And then you make the diagonal, and you do it a couple times that you build up a ridge, just like you would with the block ruler. And then you
Mhm.
can slot it right into there and trim around. And
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Okay. And I'll go grab the link from your reel and I'll put it
Mhm.
into the show notes so people can get directly to it.
Okay, there you go.
Um,
Yeah, that gives you the visuals rather than all my,
yeah.
hand motions here.
Yeah, I know.
I'm like, I feel like the visual will probably be helpful, but
Yeah.
basically that's how it's done.
Yeah. I think I understand. And I think too, like the more experience you have with certain things, the more you can kind of gather, like you can infer, like with what you know and kind of what the person's saying and kind of gather what is going on.
Mhm.
So I think too, like having more quilty experience helps, but for
Yeah, I
noobs, it's
imagine.
like just watch the reel. It's fine.
Right.
I'm like, I don't know how to tell you this better, but no, I love that. That's so cool. Cause I think too, yeah, like rulers, if you buy every single ruler out there, it's so expensive. And there's so many ways to do it less expensive. Use what you have, like find hacks for things, and you can do it without having to spend $50 on a new ruler every time you need one or think you need
Exactly.
one.
And
Yeah.
especially if you have a small sewing room, like you don't have room for 50 rulers all over the place. Like,
Yeah. They're heavy and they take up space. And yeah, we
yeah.
have we have a lot of rulers, but the one my bestie Jen got me the half square triangle um trimming ruler from Creative Grids, and it is
Mhm.
a triangle and it honestly helps a lot too. So it has like all the different markings for the different size finish sizes and like where to line it up if you want it, which way you're trimming it, and a little angle on one of the corners so you can line it up with the sides and trim off your little tags.
Ooh, I like that. I
Yeah.
have the flying geese version of that from Creative
Oh,
Grids.
yeah.
And that
That's
one
a
I
nice
really
one.
like. And I
Yeah.
liked that it had multiple sizes because
Mhm.
that's really key for me. I don't want to buy something that really just does one thing.
Yeah.
Like I want to get the most bang for my buck. So I really liked that the flying geese ruler had multiple sizes.
Yeah. That one's really cool. I saw it, what was it? Oh, at our local quilt shop, or one of them, they were doing like a demo day and they were demonstrating that ruler, and I was like, what
Mhm.
the heck? This is so cool. And yeah, it's nice for if you have to make a lot and because you do
Mhm.
have to you have to trim your flying geese. That is like the one thing that you need to know about flying geese. You
Mhm.
have to trim them up to size or they'll be all over the place. And who needs geese all over the place?
Right.
Not me. Um,
No.
but yeah, that's a cool one. So if you do make a lot of flying geese, maybe that would be a cool investment. But yeah, otherwise, if there's some ways to hack these different tools, like
Mhm.
to say that you shouldn't buy tools that you want or that you need, but if you're not interested in spending that money or you can't really get that kind of ruler where you're at, like just hack it.
Yeah.
Or there's tons of stuff online, which sometimes can be daunting to try to filter through. But here's one hack that people won't have to filter through. We'll just give them a
Right.
direct link and then they can use it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Well, um, I had one more question. What was it? Oh, what test pattern was like your most challenging? Like
Oh,
what I guess
I
that had like the most skills that you had to learn to do it.
I think probably I did Wellspring Designs company. She has the Rhythms quilt that came out in January. And that was probably the most technically difficult quilt that I've ever made. And I can't say that I knocked it out of the park by any means. There's a lot of strip piecing involved in it, which is a
Okay.
skill that I can't say that I'm great at. And it's curved piecing and it's like inset stripped pieced circles. And I got one. And then the other one's got kind of a weird bumpy situation happening on it.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
there
it's
was a
like
lot going on. I mean,
like
it's a beautiful quilt. And I definitely,
sure.
now that I've gone through the motions of doing it once, I'd love to do it again and hopefully have a little bit more success,
Yeah.
especially with those inset circles. But that was definitely the most like technically difficult pattern that I've taken on.
Whoa. That's crazy. Yeah, but it sounds really cool. I haven't seen that one, but I'll go check it out because that sounds really cool.
Yeah, it was, I mean, I also did I always trick myself into thinking that doing the wall quilt pattern is going to be the easier one. Like, oh, it's going to be easier. There's less pieces, it's smaller, but
Yeah,
no, it's the same number of pieces. It's just really tiny.
it's just shrunken.
It's just shrunken down. So, I mean, sometimes that can be a lot more difficult. It could be, it'd be easier to do like the king.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, just do it. It's bigger piecing. It's not as like tricky to get all those small curves.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
Again,
I'll try
small
the throw if
curves.
I try it again.
Yeah. Like I'm just gonna go big or go home. I mean, honestly.
Yeah,
Sometimes you just have to, because I think, yeah, you're right. When it's shrunken down, it sometimes makes it worse.
definitely.
Oh,
Yeah.
yikes. What's your most satisfying make that you ever made?
I hand quilted a quilt for the first time when I was recovering from surgery and I couldn't like get to my sewing machine and I knew I was going to go stir crazy. So I decided, well, this is a great time to learn how to hand quilt. I
Yeah,
had no idea
sure.
what I was doing. But it was a ton of fun. And I did the straw flower quilt from Side Lake Stitch.
Okay. I haven't
It's
seen that one yet either.
It's a bunch of stars, basically. It
Okay.
looks like it's a little bit more traditional looking and lots of stars. And then I did hand quilting that kind of accentuated those stars. And
Okay.
it was a lot of fun. I had never hand quilted before. I learned so much about it. Like I was trying to do it at first and I just used whatever needles were like kicking around in my kit. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend that. Like it was so hard to pull them through. I'm over here just struggling and like, wrenching on these things. And my husband's just like, can I go buy something for you that's going to make that easier? Because like watching you do that is painful. I, I just
You know,
can't.
it's bad when someone else is like, are you doing that right? You're like, what?
So I reached out to a few people and I learned like what needles to buy. So I
Oh,
got
good.
some Clover Gold Eye needles and they went through a lot easier. So that was the first tip that I had learned. And then I immediately because I was wrenching on these so much, I of course like bled all over my quilt like first thing.
Sure. Naturally.
So, I'm like, shit, what do I do? Like, how do you get blood out of a quilt that you can't wash? Because
Yeah.
it's not together yet. Like you can't wash it.
Yeah.
Which is when I learned that if you spit on it and you
Uh-huh.
rub it in, like it'll come right out.
Yeah.
So that's a great tip. If you've never tried it, if you bleed on your quilt, definitely spit on it. It'll come right
Yeah. I've had to spit on clothing, like, because I used to have eczema super bad all over my hands, and
out.
they would like my fingers would crack and bleed. And so when I was teaching, like, I might, if I had like a spot really bad on my knuckle, like if I bent my finger too hard, it would like crack open, it would bleed, and I'd get blood on my work clothes, and I would just like spit on it. And kids were like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "It actually gets blood out of your clothes. It's like
Yeah.
fast." And they're like, "Oh." And so teaching my kids practical skills while I'm teaching them math. That's fine. But yeah, also hydrogen peroxide, if you can like dab it with like a Q-tip or like a cotton ball, that'll actually help too, because it eats away
Okay.
the um like the biological material, like
Yeah.
anyway, I don't know what to call it,
Things or
but
whatever.
yeah, it's actually good for like if you buy like the 7% concentration, if you use just like a quarter cup and a full load of laundry, it'll act like bleach without bleaching anything.
Oh,
Yeah,
great tip.
really cool Airbnb trick I learned for cleaning laundry. So keeping the linens fresh.
That's funny.
But I mean, yeah, it's kind of, I was like really surprised at how well it worked. And now I don't have to use bleach. So that's even better.
Exactly.
Because if it gets on stuff, it's not going to suck the color out.
Right. Won't ruin everything.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, oh, it's just extra clean now. Okay.
Yeah. It's
But,
nice.
it's like little things you learn, and spit helps if you don't have hydrogen peroxide or stain remover. But
There you go. Yeah. Cause I tried like one of those like Clorox to go pens or whatever they're called.
yeah.
Tide to go pens.
Oh,
That
yeah.
I wouldn't recommend that.
No, that's
It's
maybe
not to
good
get
for
all
like
blood.
coffee or like a
Yeah.
food stain, but not, yeah.
Yeah.
Blood. Mm-mm. Body fluid's not good.
No. Too intense.
It is too intense for that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever used that? It's called grandma's spot stain remover.
I haven't, but I've heard it can get wine out.
That stuff is bomb. It works so good. I've used that a bunch on like if even with color catchers, if like quilts bleed in the wash, I'll like rub that on it really good and then add more color catchers, and that will get the bleeding out. So
Oh, that's good to know because I
mhm,
made a quilt with a lot of like magenta
that's gonna bleed for sure.
and I'm so nervous about it. Like
Yeah.
it's just a top right now, but I'm afraid to even make it because I'm like, it's fine where it is right now. I'm just gonna ruin it. Like,
No, you won't ruin it. Use
I'm like, I don't
hydrogen
even think there's
peroxide.
enough color catchers in the world to save this thing. Like that dark.
Oh no, I think it'll be fine. I We just did the Elizabeth Hartman Pretty Birds pattern for a client, and when we
Mhm.
washed it, there were some dark magenta, like burgundies, like really rich kind of red pinks in some of the birds, and they bled onto the background, but we just used that grandma's spot stain remover and some color catchers and we got it out. And it went through the backing too. So we were like
Oh,
on both sides, and it got it out. So
okay.
it works.
I will
And
keep that in mind.
I'm also wondering though, if you did wash it with the hydrogen peroxide, like
If that
if
would
that
help.
would help, because it would take the staining
Ow.
out instead of letting it bleed into the other fabric.
Oh. Yeah, because the background is very light. Because that's the thing that
Mhm.
I'm really nervous about. Like it's very bold magenta, and then the background is like a super, super light pink.
Oh my God, that sounds so cute.
And I'm like, okay, what
Yeah.
did I do? This is a terrible decision because it's going to be like a mess. But these tips, I think they
Yeah.
might save me.
But also it depends on the type of fabric too, because like I made the Mountain Valley pattern,
Mhm.
running stitches, her pattern with like hot pinks and purple, and it didn't bleed at all. And I used Century solids, the
Okay,
Andover solids, and it didn't bleed at all. So
good
I
to know.
think like the birds, it was a lot of like woven linens, kind of
Mhm.
looser fabric. And
Okay.
so I'm almost wondering if that was why. And the only time I've really had trouble with like colors bleeding is if it's like not as nice, like quilting cotton, like cheaper kind of Joann's or Hobby Lobby kind of stuff that maybe isn't necessarily using the best high quality dyes and processes of
Mhm.
manufacturing. So um I don't know. Might be
We'll
worth
see.
risking it for the biscuit. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
cross my fingers. Wish me luck.
I am. I'm wishing you luck because I really want it to work out, because I want to see it because it sounds so cute.
Thank you.
I'm like, pink, I love it. Give it to me.
Yeah, it's definitely probably the pinkest thing I've ever made, but it was like deep in the middle of winter, and I was like, I need some serious happy right now.
Mm-hmm.
Making the brightest quilt of my life. It's magenta, light pink, kind of creamsicle colors and yellows, and
Oh my
it's the
gosh.
brightest thing I've ever made in my life.
How fun. Sounds like Barbie land. I'm excited.
Yeah. It's definitely out of my comfort zone for color palette, but I love it.
Yeah. How fun. Hopefully it doesn't bleed. I'm gonna seriously cross my fingers and hopefully all these tips and tricks will help you if in case it does bleed, but I don't think it will. I'm just putting it out there right now. It's not going to. You'll be fine.
I'll use that grandma spot remover if it does.
Yes. Get it in a huge spray bottle.
Okay.
We have it both ways. We have it in like a spray bottle for huge spots, and then we have like a little spot dabber so we can get like little tiny ones too. So
Mhm.
I swear by it. It has worked in times when I was like, there's nothing that can save this, and it works. So it's worth investing, I think. We need to buy some futures and that stuff. No, I'm just kidding.
All right.
Oh my gosh. Well, anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really loved getting to know you and chatting with you, and
Yeah.
this has been super fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And so, where can our listeners find you online?
You can find me on Instagram. My handle is Seam Reverse Society.
Okay, awesome. I'll put that in the show notes as well so people can get to you and see all your cool stuff. And good luck with the postcards. And do you think you guys will do that again next year for like an Earth Day thing, or is it just like a one-off?
I don't know. I've never done it before, and I guess we'll see how it goes. If everything goes off without a hitch, then I don't see why not.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, that would be like such a fun thing to look forward to and have kind of out there in the universe of quilting for people to kind of think about. And maybe, if they have that to look forward to, they can kind of accumulate scraps like, oh, I want to make a postcard that looks like this or whatever. I don't know. Might be something
Exactly.
fun.
It's like an old school like pen pal kind of situation, which is
Yeah, I love that. Well, cool. Yeah, thanks again. And hopefully we'll chat soon.
yeah, sounds good. Thank you.